this new paper that Vipers provided us. This is called Philosophically Speaking, How Many Species Concepts Are There by John S. Wilkins. And if I remember, I think John S. Wilkins is actually a somebody in philosophy. So like this is like a little paper of theirs in Zootaxa. It's about 5 pages. So we'll see how it goes. As always, I'm not endorsing this. We're just reading it, seeing what has to be said or what they're trying to say. And I think we'll review this at the end. So here we go. Are we venturing into eugenics? Probably not, Kami. Usually this is literally what these papers are literally just trying to outline, like the idea of a species. This is one of these things you think like people understand. Species is not a concept that is very easy to pin down. So we were arguing about the definitions of like political stuff. Well, if you go into biology and you start to try to pin this stuff down, it gets really fucking hard. And that's what we're going to do. Yeah. Well, we'll find out. We will find out, Laughing Jesus. What are we doing? We don't know yet. All right, here we go. It's an old question in biology. What is a species? Many different answers have been given over the years, and there are indefinitely many definitions in the literature. Adding to R.L. Maiden's list of 22 definitions. Okay, so I don't know if you can see this. 22 definitions in 1997. I counted 26 in place since the modern synthesis in 2009. So that's 22 plus 26. And a new one, which I call the polyphasic concept, basically a consilience of many lines of morphological, ecological, genetic, and physiological evidence, has been implicitly extended from bacterial and other microbial contexts to macrobial species, although the terminology has not yet been translated. So that would give us 49, I guess. So yeah. Let's see. What we got? This can be very postmodern. But see, it can be postmodern, but like Laughing Jesus, we are like, this is biology though, or philosophy biology. It's just how it is. And server says, information dissemination on the internet is becoming oversimplified to a fault and an error. I don't mean to bring back to dictionaries, but after the collapse of the lexico.com in 2019, Google returns a worst guff of definition with only one sense of definition. Seems too scared to provide the etymological background for fear of someone taking offense. It's abysmal. I'll stay on the tree on this topic now. No, that's all right. There is a good point there. Like, the way that the internet has changed over the years is probably not for the better. It's for the big tech companies' bottom line and their strategies going forward. They don't like, they like being able to sell ads and, control people via online, and they do not like to be able to, like, things that go against that. And so that's kind of what goes on. No, exactly, Levine, because philosophy of taxonomy is fun. And so once you realize where it gets used, though, like this is one of these areas where it gets used. See, it's like, 1997 is, dear Lord, 27 years ago or something, 28 years ago. And so you see, like, even back then, it wasn't like, we're talking like, and then 50 years before that, they probably had a few definitions. So this is kind of what goes on. So there's a huge discussion just in like taxonomy, in like philosophy, but then also on the internet and how we work with this stuff. So it's all actually somewhat in the same area. Okay. Yeah, so Lexico was an old website. If Conservative Irk wants to tell you what Lexico is, Conservative Irk can do that. K-Par says, but Linnaeus made a taxonomy book in 1740. Problem solved. I don't know why. Or is critiquing the stuff. We have to live our lives. We have to have a horse is a horse. An oak is an oak. Look outside. Yeah. So, yeah, we could always just like stick to the 1740 definitions of things. That's right, K-Pars. Okay. So, however, on another count, there are 7 basic species concepts: agamospecies, asexual, biospecies, reproductively isolated sexual species, ecospecies, ecological niche occupiers, evolutionary species, evolving lineages, genetic species, common gene pool, morphospecies, species defined by their form or phenotypes, and taxonomic species, whatever a taxonomist calls a species. Note that some of these 7 basic concepts are not concepts of what species are, that is, what makes them species, but instead of are concepts based on how we identify species by morphology or practices of taxonomists. Others are roughly equivalent. A gene pool is defined as a population of genomes that can be exchanged, and so a genetic species is basically a reproductive species. Evolutionary species are not what species are so much as what happens when some processes, such as ecological adaptation or reproductive isolation, makes them a species that persist over a long time. One common concept of species, the so-called phylogenetic species concept, is likewise a mix of either morphospecies, biospecies, or evospecies, or all of them. Let's see. Okay, there we go. They're just discussing. Kami says, Mendel, the genetics guy, didn't get into biology school because he wasn't up to snuff on classifications. He did his best work as a monk. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of good people didn't get into school. Some of them, whatever. It happens. Adam says, I learned this in university biology too. We had to get a booklet for parts of words in Latin to understand the Latin names of such things as worms. Yeah. Latvian says, and again, just because I chock full of posty shit, I could go for some post-human stuff while we're here. Yeah, sure. It's all good. Don't get hung up on, there's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming, like, down the pipe. We've got so much tech nowadays. It's like, there's a lot of things to be unhappy about, but, like, yeah, we're going to have some cool stuff, too. Some good philosophy, hopefully. Okay. Yes, exactly, Latvian. We could start using Irish Gaelic and Gaelic and go back to like the way things were. Let's see. There was, unfortunately, Kali Oxenfree hasn't been streaming for a while. I don't know if she's going to stream again, but there used to be a linguistic streamer that she would just do linguistic streams. There are other people out there that are linguists, but they're not like, a lot of them aren't just doing linguistic streams. Kali Oxenfree used to. I mean, she was in this list here. She's in the bottom thing in the middle, Kali Oxenfree, but she has not been streaming, unfortunately. Yep. So, like, if you guys want to discuss this, that was the place to discuss language. Yeah, exactly, Adam. She was good. She, she just hasn't had. She's trying to get. She said she was trying to get her life together a little bit better. So, yeah. Stacy the Linguist, she is amazing. Yes, I've seen Stacy the Linguist. I don't follow her. I should probably follow her. But Stacy the Linguist is good too, because we'd raid into the like other people would raid into her. I've seen her before. Okay, the polyphasic concept is also based on a method for identifying species through many kinds of evidence. All right, so I just want to point out the method of identification. This goes beyond philosophy of biology. So method of identification is kind of an important thing. So like you can point at stuff, like I can point at chat, like I can point at you right now. I can point at me, but like that's one method, like that's demonstrative, pointing and stuff. But like then the like looking at these different ways of discussing stuff, these are methods of identification. Keep this in mind. This is actually a fundamental thing in philosophy, how you discuss methods of identification. She's an English as a second language professor and researcher. Cool. Okay. Agamospecies are species that lack some property, sex. See, again, you could discuss this as the method of identifying agamospecies are ones that lack the property. So the method of identification is a very fundamental concept, actually. Okay, an agamospecies is a not biospecies species, although some like G.G. Simpson and Ernst Mayr simply deny that they were species, which is a problem given that sex is a relatively rare property in the universal tree of life. It means most biological taxa do not come in species. So what makes an agamospecies a species? It can't be reproductive isolation for obvious reasons, so it must be the only thing that we have left on the list, ecological niche adaptation. It could be chance, but if grouping happens by chance, it is unlikely to be maintained by chance. In the absence of sex, therefore, we need ecological niche adaptation to keep the cluster from just randomly evaporating. Of course, few if any species are purely asexual in the sense that they don't ever change genes. Microbes have several mechanisms to do this, even if they lack genders or mating types and fail to reproduce by any other means than division. So I get this ecological niche it would be like the place they live is actually part of their biology, and the place they live is actually maintaining their life. So you've gone beyond the like sort of like what we might consider the bounds of the organism to include it into the niche, and that's where they live, and that's just kind of what maintains them. So I was like, yeah, interesting. Okay. Some genetic material can be exchanged through viral insertion, through DNA reuptake in the medium after a cell has lysed, or by deliberate insertion of small rings of DNA plasmids through pili. Horizontal or lateral genetic transfer is probably as old as life itself. While this might introduce some genetic variation into a population, it is selection for a local fitness peak that makes asexual genome not stray too far from the wild type. Laffy says, okay, so a ton of shit is hard to classify. Got it. Old tools don't work anymore. Lies means cell burst. Okay. Thank you, Adam Fire. I don't know. I do not know all these words. Yeah. So some things just spilled DNA out into their environment. I've seen like images of like this under a microscope. Yeah. So this is what happens, Latvian Jesus. We have like a received view of like what organisms are, because like me, you, like dogs, like things we live with. But once you get beyond things that we interact with every day, it gets unbelievably complicated, and the concepts we use to describe ourselves and the things we deal with every day no longer work, even close, for all the variety of life out in the world. And so you might be like, oh, we have to stick to these like hardcore concepts. It's like, nah, dude, that does not. It just does not work. It is not part of our reality. What works on a small scale does not actually translate more generally. Adam says, lower level organisms pick up DNA and incorporate it. We are more complex. We evolve things like sexual reproduction. Yeah. So that's what happens. Like there's like random pieces you can get, or then like you can do what we do, which is like massive recombination with other like humans. Crazy. Okay, as sex becomes more frequent, rising from near zero recombination per generation up to the maximum of 50% exchanged for obligatory sexual organisms, another factor comes into play. Increasingly, the compatibility of genomes, reproductive processes at the cellular, organ, and physiological level become important. In organisms with behavioral signaling, that is, with nervous systems and sensory organs, reproductive behaviors like calls and movements become important. Yeah, we're a long way from fatherless bipeds, Dorothy. Exactly, Latvian Jesus. Yeah. Sex acts to ensure that the organisms that can interbreed tend to be those whose genome and anatomy are consistent enough. I call this reproductive reach. The more closely two organisms are related, the more likely they are within each other's reach as potential mates, and so the species is maintained by reproductive compatibility and, of course, some ecological adaptation. This is very similar to a definition of species by the geneticist Alan Templeton, who said that species were the most inclusive population of individuals having the potential for phenotypic cohesion through intrinsic cohesion mechanisms that define a species as the most inclusive group of organisms having the potential for genetic and or demographic exchangeability. Genetic exchangeability here means the ability to act in the same manner in reproduction. Any two members of the species are more or less interchangeable. Demographic exchangeability means that any two members of the species behave the same ecologically, behaviorally, and so forth, and are interchangeable more or less. With these two causes of being a species, we can now narrow down the number of concepts to two: ecospecies or biospecies. Conservative work says it works as far as humans are concerned. That other organisms and animals reproduce independently is no argument for why sex is a construct. In humans, remember, we are separate via species. What do you mean by species, conservative work? That's the whole problem here. Yes, we can define human sex, but like you can define anything and then say everything else is different. But like, is that a good definition? Why would you do that? Like, what's the point there? What counts as species? That's the whole point of this paper. Like, what counts? Now, yeah, if you're only talking about humans, then it's like, yeah, but then you've defined humans as special to begin with. It's kind of begging the question. So it's like, we're not making up a construct as far as we go, but if you're talking biology, then yes, it is a construct in biology because it's arbitrary to us. Yeah. Species, subspecies, genus, family, all the usual things for when we study biology. Yeah, but that's the whole point here. It's that it's not so clear what actually counts. Like the definition of species is the question here. We can look at all of this, but we have to assume some version of species when we do that stuff. Thank you for the lurk. Frank says, those usual things are not well defined. The paper is talking exactly this. Yes, Frank. Okay, so there's a philosophical matter to clear up. These causal explanations are just that, explanations. They are not the concept of species. There was a concept of species before we had any clear what they might be. We identified species in the 15th century that are still regarded as species, and there wasn't the slightest hint of an explanation in the air at the time. Latvian says, Latvian says, I mean, science is constructivist. Okay. And it's an old concept too. Although the first simply biological definition of species, a Latin word that means form or appearance, waited until 1686 when John Ray defined it. Ray's definition was based on a simple observation. Progeny resembles their parents. Species of those groups of organisms that resemble their parents. Versions of it go back to the Greeks. According to this, there's some power or generative capacity to make progeny resemble their parents, and it seems to rely upon seeds. I call this the generative conception of species, and it was not only the default view before Darwin, but Darwin himself held it, as do nearly all modern biologists. It is what it is that the explanations explain. So technically there's only one species concept of which all others, or the 27 or 27 are conceptions. The idea that there is one generic category into which there are put many concepts is the mistake made by Ernst Mayr. Yeah, so they set this all up and then they said the idea that there is one generic category put into many concepts is a mistake made by Ernst Mayr. So they're just calling this a mistake. Like, you can go back to this historical thing, but apparently they're calling this a mistake. Okay, in ordinary philosophical usage, it is the concept that is the category, and the definitions define in various ways that concept. Another mistake often made by biologists is to think that if there is a concept/category, there has to be a specific rank or level at which all species arise. This seems to rely on the idea that because Linnaeus took Ray's concept of species and made it the lowest rank in his classification scheme, there has to be something that all and only species have as properties, and it has caused no end of confusion. That species all exist does not imply that all species have some essential property, any more than because we can usually identify what an organism is implies that there is something that all and only organisms share. This philosophical error is called essentialism, and it is a supreme irony that Mayr, the opponent of essentialism about individual species, was held in thrall to essentialism about taxonomic concepts. Yeah. So this is like what's called sometimes the genetic fallacy. They went back to what was the original cause, the way we discuss this stuff, and said, well, there's something fundamental there. There's nothing fundamental there. That's just the old definition. The old definition's fine, and a lot of people still use it as a heuristic, but it causes if you treat it as essential, it will cause you no end of headache. Like, you just can't use, it's very rare you can use one of these ancient concepts like going forward, and that's why we have like ancient metaphysics and you can discuss those, but like the ideas there have had to evolve over time. So it's like, yeah, okay, some people think that there are no species. Moreover, they wrongly think this view is a consequence of evolution, and that Darwin himself denied there was any. Now, what Darwin thought 150 years ago is of no real consequence to modern biology, but he didn't think species were unreal constructs. He thought there was no single set of properties species had to have. He was not a taxonomic essentialist. But neither is it the case that species are unreal because they shade into each other. In modern philosophy, there's an ongoing debate over whether one can have vague and fuzzy sets or kinds, but for science we need only a little logic and metaphysics. If we can identify mountains, rivers, and organisms, we can identify species, and they will tend to have a family resemblance. I mean, this is just, Wittgensteinian hand-waving here, of course. What is a species among primates will tend to be like species in all other close relatives. What is a species among lizards will usually be like what a species is in close relatives. Some lizards are parthenogens, others and have no males, where their nearest relatives are sexual, but in that case they are like their sexual cousins ecologically and morphologically. But some think that species do not exist except in the minds of biologists and their public. So for them, 0. Our final score is 26 to 27, 7 to 1, or 0. The author finally says, My solution is this. There is one species concept. There are two explanations of why real species are species, and then they say reference, see what I said in 2007. Ecological adaptation and reproductive reach. There are 7 distinct definitions of species and 27 current variations and mixtures, and there are n+1 definitions of species in a room of n biologists. Yeah. Now, what point does an eagle become bald? Asked Kapars. That's too deep. Too deep. As when I went and asked Akihiro Kanamori what implication was, he just goes, too deep. Too deep. Alright. So here's what we do. We rate the paper. Do all eagles fit in the category of bald or not bald? Yes. We rate the paper. This was a short little paper on the different ways of species, the different numbers of species concept, how many species concepts, and let me know what you thought about it. If you thought it was fun, made your brain dance, give it a brain dance. If you thought it talked about existential or artistic drama, nog scream. Spelling and capitalization do matter here. Nog oral for deep ancient ideas, nog knife for slicing and dicing arguments, nog navel gazing only for academics, nog turd for all style and no substance, still poop underneath, and nog grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also use the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch, and my vote meh. Note, anything in the green will make an overall score I give it go up, in the red go down, and the vote meh kind of pushes everything to the beginning. So yeah, thank you, Latvian Jesus gave it a meh. Latvian Jesus also gave it a yay. That will average out the meh and the yay. That's cool. Frank gave it a brain dance. Same with Adam Fighter. Dame Karen, what's up, Dame Karen? Gave it a poop. That's fine. You don't know if you like it or not? That's fine. I mean, you can also give it a meh also. It's like, that's what the meh is there for. K-Pars gave it grapes, navel gazing, yeah, and a meh. Okay. You mean you do, but not as like it as a paper. Very hard to articulate. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, so you like the idea, you don't know if you like the execution. Socknell gave it the navel gazing, poop, and the meh. Cool. Yeah. Oh, welcome in, Dame Karen. I do not check my chat list. I don't know who's lurking and who isn't. So if you're here, cool. If you're not, cool too. I appreciate the lurkers. Frank gave it a yay. Okay, so Frank does like it. Cool. So what do I say? Yeah. You know, this was a little nog knifey. I mean, they were giving did they give arguments or were they just describing stuff? They were kind of just describing stuff. They didn't really give out arguments. I don't hate this. I mean, this is kind of this is fine. I'm going to give it a vote meh. I'm going to give it a brain dance. It was a little bit of fun. But I don't have a ton to say about this. Maybe I'll just give it, it was fun and silly, yeah. So I feel like it's in the middle somewhere. This is nothing great, but it's not bad either. Maybe I'll give it a vote yay and a vote meh, because it's a little bit of, see, the brain dance is kind of good. It's kind of fun, but kind of meh. It's all right. This is fine, fine. Dame says, I usually don't catch the whole paper, but there was a short one and relevant to your interest. Yeah, well, glad you could catch it. I am starting to lose words now. Kami says, I think it's pretty universally considered bad among biologists to cross species. Is it? I mean, we're not doing Island of Dr. Moreau here, but the idea is there's a lot of haziness at the edge of species a lot of times. There's not much slicing and dicing. That's right, Latvian. I that's why I went away from it. They outlined a history of argumentation is kind of what happened here. Hard to see how it advanced anything, though. I think this was actually kind of a more public Frank, I think that's a good point. I feel like this was a more public-facing philosophy. It may have been only for academics, but this wasn't for academic philosophers of biology. Academic philosophers of biology, they know this. I feel like this was kind of for the more biology audience, for biologists who might say, "Oh, what did the philosopher how should I think about species?" It may not be the focus of their research, but they might appreciate knowing all the different ways that things can go into this. Kami said, I feel like you could have surveyed some biologists. This is philosophy. We don't you can do that, but for a 5-page paper, it's fine. Conservative says the answer is certainly not that we're all one species, in which because a pink seahorse reproduced asexually or manages to sexually reproduce by self-fertilization or hermaphroditism is not an argument for why gender is a construct in humans. No, but no one was saying anything about gender constructs in humans either. This is looking at historical and contemporary definitions of species. It has nothing to do with like gender, but like, yeah. And the idea that we're all one species, no one's saying that. The idea that there is no good definition of species, and so there is no like there is no species. No one was. I don't think there is any claim that we're all the same either. It's the question is how do we break it down, and like, you know, what's the most useful way to break it down? And I don't think the 0 is a very good way, but they said that too. Yeah. No, this didn't go like this. Yeah, exactly, conservative. Like, this just was keeping to like what they wanted to say was just like how to look at the definitions of species. That's what they were looking at. Depends what you mean by cross species, says Dame Karen. They tend to cross parts of DNA rather than whole species. That's true too. Do we share DNA with other stuff? And do a lot of other species share DNA with like random other things? That's true. Like, so there is a lot of like genetics stuff. Yep. So Adam says now there's the field of genetics. Today almost all research is in genetics. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Conservatives is a deconstructionist paper in biology, hierarchical organization of different living things. Well, I mean, it's talking about the different definitions of species. I mean, I don't see how that's deconstructionist. It's kind of like a historical survey. I mean, if you think historical surveys are deconstructionist, okay then, but like, it's not what happened. Like, what got deconstructed? Kami says, like, zookeepers aren't supposed to cross lions and tigers. You don't like ligers? But if you are researching genetics, there are other guidelines. Yeah, that's true. K-Par says a species comes as a way to demarcate species along a criterion. It's not saying there's one species. Well, again, people do want ways to, like, what do you mean by demarcate then? Like, what's the goal? Like, methods of identification do matter, like, in general. So we need something, but like the people who say there's 0, well, they're saying that for a very narrow reason. They're not denying that humans are humans and like cats are cats and like dogs are dogs. That's not what's going on here. The idea is that, like, you know, it's just what's the most useful concept when we start talking about like organisms. So it's like, how do we organize this idea about what we think about things out there? Ligers are a new concept, both intriguing and strange, says Dame Karen. Adam says almost all dogs and fruits are mutants. Yeah, it's a shame what we do to our dogs. Like, some of them need to be taken care of better. Dame says, like, scientists might cross a fluorescent gene from a marine plant species into a rabbit, but they're not just mixing the whole genome. Yep. K-Parts, I'm just saying that when the paper says there's one species concept, is not saying there's only one species. Yeah. Absolutely. Saying there's one defining difference maker. Yeah, and so again, you're going to have people with different preferences along those lines. Although this person did argue for their sort of like one big concept that holds everything together. You know who'd love the argument? Old vegan housemate. Yeah. So that's part of the issue here. Everyone has their sort of like view on how the world is, and it's a political decision quite often what concept of species gets used, because that's the one that, you know, conforms to their view of the world. And so, okay. But if anyone else wants to get their rating in, now's the time. I should have done that earlier. But then we're going to go find someone to raid. Let's go see who's on. I'll go look who's online. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it.